right, everyone. Welcome back to this special presentation on the Canadian Immigration Institute YouTube channel. And I think we're also broadcasting across all of our other platforms, LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. So I'm grateful to have Brandi Robb here with me. She's a CELPIP online instructor, and she's really kind of the face of CELPIP to a large extent with these tutorials. And we're grateful to have her here. How are you doing, Brandi?
I'm very well, Mark. Thank you so much. And it's also fun to be back as well. I know I last saw you in February. I think we did some speaking skill discussions. So it's nice to be back to do some writing as well today.
You bet. We did. So if you go back and you listen to the podcast, we've done that. We've done some other video presentations, and now we're back with one probably I'd say is the most important section or the most difficult one that people struggle with, and that's writing. And when we meet with clients, I can't tell you how many times, Brandi, individuals say, well, I did okay on the other abilities, but I was just slightly below the CLB 9 for my writing. And so hopefully the tips that we're going to be sharing today, and I'm so grateful to have you pull the curtain back a little bit on this CELPIP process. But as we start, maybe you can talk a little bit about CELPIP. And most people have their views on what the language tests are for Canada, but why don't you give a little bit of background on CELPIP?
Sure thing. So the CELPIP test, as you probably know by now, is a language proficiency test that's taken largely for immigration purposes. So I deliver a lot of these presentations with viewers all across the globe that are applying for their permanent residency status here in Canada. So that would be the main reason anyone would take CELPIP. That particular test will assess your abilities in the 4 component areas of language. So we're looking at the listening, the reading, the writing, and the speaking. There's not really a pass or fail per se for CELPIP, but of course everyone is looking to earn the maximum number of points they can for immigration. So we always say about a level 9 on the CELPIP test is a pretty minimal benchmark score that a lot of people are aiming for. So as we get into today's session with the writing, we're actually going to be targeting the skills that you would need to demonstrate in the writing components to earn at least a level 9, or if not higher, if you've got the capabilities to do so.
Excellent. And language drives the ship when it comes to permanent residence and other visas in Canada. So it's a really, really important component to the process, and one that individuals need to really work at, because if you can do well, then doors open for you.
Right.
All right. Well, let's slide over here to your presentation, Brandi, and then I'll turn things over to you.
Sounds good. So again, even though the CELPIP will assess all areas of language, today we're just going to focus on the writing skills. So a little bit about me. I've been working with a company named Prometric, which delivers the CELPIP test, for about 4 years or so, but I've been teaching for almost 24 years, all said and done. And I currently live in Vancouver, and the last 19 years or so of my teaching career, I've been working with adult students to help them develop their language skills. So helping all of you viewers now preparing for your language proficiency test is a good passion of mine, and a good fit for my skill set as well. So I had mentioned that the CELPIP is taken predominantly for PR status. And I just wanted to also add a little caveat to that if you're applying for your Canadian citizenship, you can also take the CELPIP test, but you would take the version on the right here in green. That's called the CELPIP General LS. This one is only going to assess listening and speaking skills. So the length of these 2 tests, of course, is very different. The writing skills we're looking at today, of course, would only then be suitable for the general test, which is the one for permanent residency status. So when you complete the writing sections on CELPIP, you're going to be asked to complete 2 different writing tasks, as you see here. So the first thing you'll have to do is write an email. And the second thing is to respond to a survey question. You'll be giving an opinion and coming up with reasons to support it. So again, the writing section is going to happen third in the list of the 4 components that you would be assessed on the CELPIP general test. So it takes about 1 hour to complete just the writing section. As you can see, you've got 27 minutes to write the email, and then 26 minutes, of course, to write that second task, the survey. There is a word count on this test, and there will be a word counter right on your computer screen where you're typing. So your aim is to achieve between 150 to 200 words. So it's the same word count for each task. And the questions on the test that you'll be writing about are designed to reflect everyday community activities. So these are probably activities you've already accomplished in life, or if you haven't done those specific situations, you could easily relate to them and imagine doing so as you sort of formulate the details for the response itself. So we talked just a little bit about scoring as we open today's episode, but here's your entire score chart from top to bottom. So the maximum score anybody might achieve on CELPIP is a level 12, and anybody earning a level 12 would be considered an advanced communicator in the English language. And again, today's episode and a lot of the sessions that we provide are targeting skills that hopefully will help you achieve that level 9 or even higher. As again, this is a benchmark skill for a lot of people as they're applying for permanent residency status in Canada. You'll notice that the CELPIP levels as well that you'll receive on the test are associated against the Canadian language benchmarks as well. So the CLB levels for short as well.
And I wanted to just jump in quick. I'm just going to kind of interject periodically, Brandi. So when we...
Okay, I've lost your audio.
There we go. Sorry. So when we're looking at the top part, if you go back to the previous the screen, so between 12 and 11 there, they both say advanced. So what is the difference between a level 11 and a 12? Like, is there, like, are we talking about just splitting hairs here, or what does it really take to take that last jump all the way up to the top?
It's a very minor difference. And I think once I show you the rater's checklist of skills that they're looking for, it might become just a little bit easier to grasp. But you're right, there's a very small difference between levels 11 and 12, as they are both considered advanced communication. In simple terms, if I can try to summarize, a level 12 writer has that extra polish or that extra flair or personal style and sophistication that perhaps a level 11 writer doesn't quite have yet. But both advanced responses would capture a lot of precise, specific details, impeccable organization. Usually paragraph skills and grammar skills and sentence structures are complex and organized well at that stage of the game. We also have a free product on our website as well that will help people understand what these different levels look like. This is called the Score Comparison Chart. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of today's episode. And I believe we've got a link in your YouTube feed as well that will take you there. But on our website, we do include writing responses and also speaking responses from real test takers from past CELPIP tests who have achieved every single level here of the CELPIP score. So once you go in there and you read over a level 12 piece of writing and then look at a level 11, you'll see what I mean there by a slight difference in sophistication. But yeah, they're close. If you're achieving an advanced level, you know how to write, you know how to speak well. It's not a huge difference. Yeah, great question. We get that one quite often as well too. All right. We're going to do a practice question today ourselves. So this was once a real CELPIP test question. It's no longer live. So you're not ever going to see this question again on a future test. That's the only reason I can share this with you publicly, and we can discuss it as a group. But what I'd like us to do is, of course, first of all, read through the question together. And I'm going to be asking our audience today, as well as Mark, if he's keen to participate,
Absolutely.
to help us. Good. I'm glad to hear you say that. We're going to be adding in some details here and discussing how we would approach this question if it really was our question for task 1 on the test. So I'll maybe just read the background situation on the left aloud so we can keep together in the episode here today.
Perfect.
So this
I was going to say here that Shirley said she took the CELPIP 4 times, finally got a band 10 in all areas on the last sitting. So Shirley, we're going to be relying on you to contribute here and help everybody else because you've been through this rodeo.
Yes, exactly. The past experience is extremely helpful as well. So for this particular test question, the situation we have to understand first before we can write is always on the left. And this one says, you recently made reservations for dinner at a very famous and expensive restaurant in town. However, the meal and the service were terrible. The restaurant manager was not available to solve the problem, so you left without a resolution. So you're going to read that over quickly, understand who you are. You're the paying customer in this situation. And then you go over to the right-hand side to find out who you're asked to write to. So the instructions in blue tell you to write an email to the restaurant's manager, reminds you of the word count. It's 150 to 200 words. And then your email must do the following things. So these bulleted points, we'll call them writing tasks. These are the main ideas that you absolutely must address through the course of the email you'll be writing. So I always say to our viewers that task 1 for CELPIP, I think is a little bit easier to organize because the thinking for the main ideas has been done for you. The first main idea you must write about is this top bulleted point, and it says to state what problems you had with the food you ordered. Secondly, you must complain about the service. And at some point in the email, you must describe how you want the restaurant to resolve the problem to your satisfaction. So those are your main ideas already, but it's up to you then to come up with the specific details to make this writing a lot more interesting and a lot more informative. And that's the part that we're going to work on together today as a group. When you're writing about this, by the way, I caution you to use your own vocabulary. You don't want to just copy words right from the test screen. Part of your score does come from how well you're able to showcase your own vocabulary. So always paraphrase ideas that you see here. That's a really strong tip. Now, I've mentioned this word count a few times now, but I'll let you in on a little secret, if you will. The raters who assess this, and the raters are the actual human beings. It's not AI for CELPIP. There are at least 4 different professionally trained raters that will be reading over your email and then the second writing task, the opinion survey. So they're looking for you to achieve 150 to 200 words, but they're a little bit flexible here, and they will grant you a 10% leeway. So if you were to submit 10% above or below this word count, so that would be 135 words to 220 words, you're not going to lose marks in the overall marking scheme for the submission. That being said, though, I would encourage all of our viewers here today to make the 200 word count a goal if you can write that much in the 27 minutes that you're given. Because the more specific details and the more interesting your vocabulary that you include, the higher the quality of the response and the better your score. So if you're only writing 135 words, I fear that you're not giving as much description and as much detail as possible. So therefore your score might not be quite as strong. So aim for 200. That's always a good benchmark skill. Just don't go over 220 or you do start to lose marks. Okay, and it is an email, so we have to know how to structure an email properly. And we'll talk about that today. There are some greetings and some sign-offs that are very customary that we use in Canada in particular, so we can discuss that as we go. So when you take CELPIP, I should have mentioned, this is an online computer test that you must take in a testing center. You cannot take this test from your home computer, or the IRCC in Canada will not accept the score for immigration. So when you're in the testing room, this is what your computer screen would look like. We've already read through the instructions at the top there, but I wanted to point out where you'll be actually doing the writing. So there's a little writer space here, and that's where you'll type with the keyboard and the station that you're sitting at. And your word counter as well is visible on the screen at all times. So it's going to adjust in live time as you add words or even take words out to change them. So again, watch for that to get close to 200. Okay, and the timer is up at the top here. You start with 27 minutes, and that clock will start to count down or count backwards the moment you begin writing. So just keep an eye now and then and make sure you're moving through your email at a good pace. Whatever you have submitted in this little space, when that clock gets to 0, that's what gets sent off for the raters to assess. So you just want to make sure you've got time to finish. If you do finish early, and some people do, when you practice at home enough, I think you get much quicker with the writing. So if you do have a few minutes remaining on your clock, I'd recommend that you proofread your work. Read it through from top to bottom and double check that all your grammar is correct, your ideas are interesting, and so on. If you still have remaining time, that's when you might want to click this next button. So it would move you forward to the next task, which would be writing task 2 in this case. So you don't have to just sit there at this point and wait for the clock to count to 0. Once you move forward, though, please know that you cannot go back. So only click next if you're confident and ready to continue moving. You also don't get to carry with you extra time. So if you had a minute here and you click next, you don't get to add that minute to the next writing task. So each screen starts with its own predetermined amount of time at the very top. All right. Here's our giant list of skills that the raters are looking for. Again, the people who are reading your submissions and giving you a score accordingly. So they're looking for you to demonstrate strengths across all 4 of these categories. We call them dimensions. And they're also going to identify weaknesses in the writing as well. So assessing your strengths and weaknesses, they're going to arrive at a score in that chart that I showed you earlier with level 12 at the top. So for today's email, as we're about getting ready here to start the writing, what I'd like us to do before we even put our fingers on the keyboard and start typing away is I'd like us to take just a couple of minutes to organize our thoughts. So the content details that the raters are looking for you, first of all, includes the number of main ideas. So remember for task 1, those bulleted points we saw, asking to complain about food, service, and asking the manager for a solution, those are the main ideas. So this part of the rater's checklist is easy for task 1. That's already been established. We know we have 3 main points we must include. The challenging part, though, for some of us might be to envision how the writing on the screen is going to look like. So we really do need to learn how to paragraph our writing properly if we would like to achieve a top score on CELPIP. So in basic terms, when we write anything, every single time we have a new main idea, we're supposed to start a brand new paragraph. We never want to just submit a piece of writing in one gigantic block of information. That's really difficult for the reader to understand. So every single time there's a new main idea, again, we put that in a separate paragraph to make the reader's job so much easier. So when you look back at the question that we're trying to write about today, and we know we have to accomplish these 3 things, we probably want to start thinking about how many paragraphs we're going to include, even before we start typing. And we should decide as well which order we're going to tick these items off the list to get a full answer. So when you're writing an email, think about the first paragraph. Have you ever noticed that the first paragraph of any email tends to be the shortest? And that's usually because we might give one little sentence of introduction to explain the background for the reader. And then we usually come right out with the purpose for why we're writing. Call that the purpose statement or the reason. So when you're looking at these 3 bulleted points that you have to discuss somewhere in your question, I would argue that the bottom one, right down there, asking the restaurant manager to somehow resolve this problem. We left so unhappy, remember, as the food and service were terrible. So we need to come up with a practical solution. What are we going to ask the restaurant manager to do for us to make things right? So because that's the main reason why we're writing, I would suggest that we first of all summarize the background situation on the left, just one little sentence to explain to the manager reading this, that we dined at the restaurant and didn't enjoy ourselves. I think that's fine. And then another sentence to actually come up with a very specific request for action. All right. Can I pause there for a moment? I can ask Mark and any of our viewers as well. If this were your situation, what would be a logical or appropriate request to make to the restaurant manager to whom you're writing? What would you ask them to do for you? So these are the details you're looking at. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we'll see here. We've got Krishna, who is getting ready right now to write the exam on August the 12th. Okay. He said, "This is helpful. Thank you, Mark, Brandi, and the CELPIP team." And so maybe I'll ask Krishna and Shirley here as well, if they can post in the comments just what they think the resolution should be. So what, but I'll offer my thoughts and maybe they'll agree. But let's see, we've got Addie here who's chimed in, and Addie says we can always ask for a refund. And that's what I would probably ask for myself as well. Yes. To get my money back if I paid for a meal that was definitely below standard for a fancy restaurant.
Yes, that would be probably, a lot of us might think of that first. There's not ever just one solution though. Remember, when you're making up your details for CELPIP, you have choice, and that's the good news. We all have different ideas. We just need to make sure that whatever we request is suitable and logical and could happen. It's a possibility. So a refund is probably the one a lot of us would think of. Are there any other ideas there, Krishna?
So, yeah, so refund the amount. And then Addie says, also can ask how can we be assured this will be actioned and avoided in the future, which is a great response. So if the service was bad, what steps are you going to take to ensure that other people don't suffer the horrible service that I received when I was at your fine establishment, right?
Right. And you could even couch it saying, if you ever were to return as a customer, you would want reassurance that the service would then improve for the next time. So I really like that line of thinking. I think that's really high level. It's showing creativity for sure. Some people in the past, I've done sessions workshopping this particular question. Others have suggested things like perhaps receiving a gift card in the amount of the bill that you paid. I mean, that's one possibility, assuming that you want to go back to the restaurant again. Yeah. So again, you've got some choice. So we'll come back to that in a moment as we write, but our viewers can maybe still continue to think on another solution if there are any. So I would say that would be our first paragraph. The next 2 points about food and service, I guess it doesn't really matter which order you address them in your writing, as long as you complete both tasks. So since the food is listed first here in the question, let's just do that one second. We can then complain about the service third. So these are separate paragraphs. So again, we write, we leave a blank space, we write another paragraph. They're all different main ideas. So this is where we're helping to organize our response. So we would then, once we get writing, we will have accomplished all of the tasks. But remember, our email format customarily includes a little concluding paragraph. And again, if you think of all the emails you've either written or received, you'll probably notice too that the conclusion is very short. So on your CELPIP test, if you just even had 1 or 2 sentences to, sometimes summarize the main points you made. In this case, we might want to re-emphasize our request. If we did ask for a refund, we could come back to that. I think leaving our contact information for this particular question would be really helpful, since we would like the manager to, somehow get a hold of us and let us know if our request has been accepted. So this process that we've just sort of discussed through as to how to organize would be called the pre-writing or the brainstorming. You're most welcome in the testing room to actually write down or number your paragraphs. You'll be given a piece of paper and pen in the testing room. So you could just write 1, 2, 3, 4, intro, purpose, food, service, conclusion, if you wanted to keep yourself on track. If not, you could just at least be mindful that this is the approach that you're going to take. So you now know exactly how you're going to structure this.
Here's
so the
next question, Brandi, this one is kind of relevant. So Image Magician says, does it matter if we don't follow the same order of the paragraphs suggested on the slide?
No, it doesn't matter as long as you complete all tasks. But that being said, remember, part of the score does assess your ability to structure an email. So there are definitely some elements that you'll want to include in the introductory paragraph, usually like your purpose statement, and in the conclusion as well, a wrap up and contact. But as far as those middle paragraphs where you put all of the main details, such as the problems with food or the problems with service, it doesn't matter which order that you discuss those in at all. It's not going to affect your score as long as you've paragraphed them appropriately, we'll say. Yeah.
And I've got one other question as well that kind of came up. So everybody has a different view on how this issue should be resolved, which is the good part of it. So Karen says, asking for a refund may look cheap, but then he came back with, so we can ask to change the chef. So obviously I think in Canada, we probably, here that probably wouldn't be a typical request, to demand that somebody be fired. But if you are, asking that someone else prepare your food, I guess might be an option. But if the response that you have might seem a little bit too aggressive, let's say, does that make a difference, in how people are awarded their points? So
absolutely. Yeah. That's called tone. So the tone of your writing is always the emotion that you are making the reader feel as they read back your response. And we usually accomplish a tone, not just through the ideas. It's more affected by your word choice. So Mark, you actually explained that quite well. And I should have explained to our viewers too, I can't see your comments coming into the live feed, so I'm relying on Mark to read them out for me. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
but the way
I'm just pulling them on the screen here. So yeah.
Perfect. But yes, if we were to actually write word for word and say, we demand that the chef be fired and replaced, well, that's going to come across as incredibly demanding and rude and bossy. And that would probably not earn us the purpose. We wouldn't be taken seriously. The reader would be offended and likely not want to even continue reading. But if we couched it in a different way to say, the service and the food or the food in particular was substandard. So perhaps a different chef might take over the main duties in the meantime until you can train everyone to improve their skills. It's the same idea, but you're phrasing it in a much gentler approach.
Yes,
and your tone is really important, not just for CELPIP, but in daily life communication as well. We always want to be get our point across confidently, but without offending the reader. The moment you make somebody upset, they're not going to want to keep reading and listen to you, is basically how I think of it too. Yeah, excellent question. I'm really glad you raised it.
That is true Canadian fashion. We are polite, we can be firm, but we don't need to be rude. And
That's
so
right.
that is true Canadian fashion. We have just a couple others. I want to keep everybody engaged here. Rosie says we can ask for coupons or food vouchers to compensate the cost. And she said improving the food quality and training should be imparted so that the food is of gourmet quality. Because after all, this is a fancy restaurant, right?
Fantastic.
So this is
all
good.
of those ideas make sense. Yeah, excellent. You've all got the right mindset going into this, right? Okay, what I'd like to do next is just demonstrate. I'm going to give you a little paragraph that's going to summarize the background situation on the left here and also provide a purpose statement. So I'm going to show it to you now. This is not level 9 work quite yet. We as a group are going to workshop it to make it even better. But I'll read it out as our first attempt, our first draft, as we write this first paragraph here. So we've simply addressed the email to the restaurant manager. We don't know their name. So we can say, "Dear restaurant manager, we ate at your restaurant, but we did not enjoy the food or the service. Since the manager was not there, we paid our bill and left unhappy. As a result, we would like the manager to do something to make up for the time and money we spent." So that's kind of like a first attempt at addressing the situation and approaching a purpose statement. But you might notice there really aren't any specific details there at all. We don't have a catchy opening enough to really focus the reader's attention. So when you look back at the skill sets that the raters are looking for you to demonstrate, beyond just the number of ideas, they also want from you very specific examples and supporting details. So the more specific your ideas and the more description you include in your writing, the more interesting the writing becomes. And then that elevates the quality of the writing overall. So what I'd like us to do is return to this very simple, somewhat boring piece of writing. And we're going to now go back and add in some of those missing elements. And think of any good story that we write. I always like to capture those 5 W's: the who, what, where, when, why. These details often do add that little missing perk of interest to any piece of writing and are oftentimes helpful to express our ideas. So the first thing I'd like from all of us, Mark included, if you can, rather than simply say, "We ate at your restaurant," can we just come up with the name of the restaurant? Can we be specific? So you can choose your favorite restaurant name. You can make a name up. It really doesn't matter. But by using specific names, you're already taking a step closer to adding those specifics in. Mark, what was the last restaurant you ate at? Do you have a name for us?
Well,
do you remember?
Lethbridge here isn't it isn't the center of fancy restaurants in Canada, and so, but I think at the Keg, I had a nice steak at the Keg. So
yes, nice. Actually, I think the Keg was one of the last restaurants I ate at as well. Oh, well, no, I take it back. Mine was the Sylvia Hotel. Either way, it doesn't matter. So that might be yours. I would have something different. Our viewers can be thinking about a restaurant that they perhaps enjoy. Or again, just make one up. Maybe there's a restaurant on the corner nearby where you live. Even if you've never actually been in, just grab that name and throw it right into the writing. So for argument's sake, I went with an Italian restaurant. And this one, I made up the name itself. But I wanted to go with Italian because I once had a terrible meal at this Italian restaurant. I couldn't remember the name, but I thought this will work. And when you're writing on the test and you have a limited amount of time, if you can actually write about your own life experience, choose events that have already happened to you and include them in your answer, it's so much easier to think of the details. They'll come to you more quickly. So I'd encourage you to try to think of a terrible meal you once had at a restaurant, and we'll get into that. So let's
I'll jump in here too, Brandi, and I'll say, any Valentino restaurants out there, this is by no way is a reflection of your actual restaurant. This is a fictitious name that bears no resemblance to the actual Valentino's restaurant, which I'm sure is wonderful. Absolutely.
Right. And I'm sure it does exist somewhere. I don't know. I've never been to one, but that's a good caveat to make. That's also quite Canadian too. Making sure no one's offended. All right, so we've got a restaurant name. That's a start, but let's even polish the we. We ate at Valentino's. So can we just tell the manager who was there, just to get them to imagine our scene? So clearly we were at the restaurant. We're the ones writing this email, but who else was with you? Let's just be, direct about it, specific, but we can keep it simple at the same time. So think, were you there with your brother, your husband, your wife, your twin sisters? Doesn't really matter. Just come up with somebody that you were there with. And we probably want to let the manager reading this understand when this event occurred. I think that's key to this whole email. They need to understand who is working that shift, I guess, once we complain. So what would be an appropriate when detail? Can I open this to viewers? Like, what would you suggest here? There are so many different details you could include, but can we practice being specific now?
I'm going to pull this comment up here. Interesting. So it's okay and encouraged to add made up details?
Yes, absolutely. You should be adding made up details to be more specific. The details you add, though, have to be suitable for the question. They have to either add interest or even convey the meaning that you're aiming for. So, I mean, in this case, letting the restaurant manager know when you dined is going to help them understand the situation better, I would argue. You know, if they realize that was Tuesday night and that's when this new server was on, well, then all of a sudden we understand maybe why the service was bad. So these are the details.
We may not be the only ones that were complaining that evening about the service.
Absolutely. And imagine if, say, 20 people all complained about the Tuesday night service, then clearly there's a problem to address with that shift. So this is the way you're thinking about these problems. Yeah. So I just gave one example, you know, Tuesday night, maybe last Monday. Be specific. Don't just say, you know, a few weeks ago. That's a little bit too general still. You might even give the exact date. You know, on July 3rd, my son and I ate at Valentino's. So there's multiple opportunities here, but just add one specific detail. And here's another detail I'm going to suggest. Without getting too personal, we come up with the reason why we were at this restaurant. Because if we are really going to ask for that refund for our money, if we can have the manager understand that this was supposed to be a special occasion. Yeah, so they'll probably understand better how disappointing it truly was for us that the food and the meal, the service were substandard. So we'd likely be more apt to get our request, you know, in the first place. So why would we go to a restaurant? Can we brainstorm a few special occasion events together that would be suitable here? What comes to mind?
Well, for me, how about a 50th birthday?
Fantastic. Is that a true story, Mark?
Yeah, it was last year.
Yeah, a 50th or a milestone birthday. Fantastic. Yeah. What else? This time of year, we've just had the end of June come and go. And in Canada, what happens at the end of June with all of our high school students?
Graduation.
Yeah, they often graduate.
I'm waiting to see if anybody else has some ideas. What would you guys like to have for your special occasion for this dinner at Valentino's? We'll see if people have some thoughts.
Make it up. Go from your real life or add a detail that just makes sense. Doesn't have to.
Kushbi says graduation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Magician says Mark doesn't look like 50 at all. Well, I don't feel like I'm 50 either.
Yeah, I'll be there in a few years myself. So I get it. I don't feel that old either.
Kushbi says promotion as another idea too, like a job promotion.
I hadn't thought of that, actually. I was thinking more like anniversary, like a wedding anniversary. I like the idea of promotion. Yeah. So again,
Addie says 18th birthday. Addie says 18th birthday. So great responses. Thanks, guys.
Fantastic. So again, as you can see, there would be so many different details you might include for these 4 W's posted there. I'm just going to very quickly suggest some. This by no means means that your ideas weren't acceptable. Everyone had some great input. But just as an example, I'm going to read out loud this bottom paragraph, and you can see those yellow details are the ones we've added in to capture those 5 W's, just to add interest and focus the scene. So we say here, yesterday evening, my teenage son and I ate at Valentino's to celebrate my son's high school graduation, but we did not enjoy the food or the service. Since the manager was not there, we paid our bill and left unhappy. As a result, we would like the manager to refund the total cost of our bill. So that is so much more detailed and interesting than what we started with up top. So we're now adding those details in. That's going to help satisfy the content areas there of that top part of the rater's checklist. So you're aiming to do this all the way through the writing whenever you have the opportunity to be specific. And that sort of leads into our next topic here, which is all about the vocab. So yes, this is a day-to-day language test. You're using words that are suitable for the situation, but you're going to achieve that level 9 or even higher by being precise. So at no time do we ever want to use very general, vague language, such as thing or stuff or there or it. None of those words give us any information that's terribly useful for the situation we're writing about. So if you were writing about a person, as you're typing away, was this person indeed a restaurant manager? Was it a university professor? Was it a 3-year-old toddler? So those 3 examples are so much more precise than just saying person. A person could be hundreds of different ideas. So again, always aim to be very precise with your word choice and watch yourself with repetition. This can be problematic with some writers. As you might notice, maybe you do this yourself, but as you're typing away, you might have a couple of fantastic high-level words you like to use. That's wonderful. Just don't use that same word 10 times in an email, for example. We always aim to have a nice variety of word choice so we can really showcase to the raters giving us a score that we've done a good job with our vocab, hopefully maximize our score.
I've got one other question from Krishna, just kind of an overarching kind of question. For the email writing, will it be formal or informal?
That is a good question. I was going to address at the end, but let's do it right now. You can see the opening paragraph we've already sort of written together here. We're addressing a restaurant manager, so you tell me. Should you be using casual slang language or should you be using slightly more formal language? What would make sense for this particular question, do you think?
I know my response. I would definitely, if you're making a request like that, let's see if anyone connects in. We've got Rohit who's connected in from Chennai, India. Good to have you here, Rohit. Okay, here we go. Here's the response. Kushbu says formal language.
Absolutely. Yeah, formal language. So the rule of thumb, that's an expression that means in general terms, when you're writing to a stranger of any kind, regardless of who it is, we should be using a more formal approach anyway. That's just being polite and considerate of the reader. Since you don't know them, you just want to be cautious and not be too casual and risk offending them. So not only is this manager to whom we're writing a stranger, I'm guessing we don't know them personally, they're also in a position of authority. They are a manager after all. And even though we didn't enjoy our meal here and we're complaining, we still need to be mindful of our audience. And that's the key, again, not just on CELPIP, but in your day-to-day writing, in the workplace or what have you. Always think about who's reading this, and then how would I approach the situation to get my point across without offending? That's what we're always trying to consider. It goes back to tone. So this one definitely would be a formal approach for sure. No slang, no idioms. We don't want to go down that road. With a friend, maybe, sure, but not when we're writing a restaurant manager that we don't know personally as well. Yeah.
That's perfect. And we've got 100% responses here, formal across the board.
Good. I'm glad that everyone's recognizing that. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Here's the paragraph we've already jazzed up a bit. It's the one with those extra details for the 5 W's. I just wanted to do a quick once over here and pull out some words, vocabulary choices that I think are just a little bit plain or simple. And I'm hoping as a group, we can elevate the writing just a wee bit, make it more interesting to really catch that vocabulary score. So again, it starts by saying, yesterday evening, my teenage son and I ate at Valentino's. The idea is clear. We all know what it means. We ate there. But I find that word, it's a little bit simple. Is there any synonym, another word that means the same as ate, that you could substitute in here, just to sort of elevate the language, even just a little bit? We're not asking for you to go way to the top, but just what other words come to mind? What are some possibilities here for the word ate? It's past tense.
Well, I would have suggested the exact same one that Kushbu suggested, which was dined.
That's what I thought. We're all on the right page, or the same page, I should say. Yeah, that's the first one I came up with too.
Well done. Oh, here, let's get a little. We have to put a little some applause in there. That was a great answer, Kushbu. Yeah, and Addie confirmed it's a good one.
There might be some other words. You don't want to overthink this. Again, when you're reading back your writing on the test, you only have 27 minutes. So do a once over. If you come up with another better word, throw it in. If you don't, just keep going. It's not the end of the world if you don't have every single word the way you'd like it, but we're just trying to do our best here. So dined, I think, is more interesting than ate. So let's just leave it as so and continue. Yeah.
Unless we've had a ton of responses. I just want to flip back here, and I'm not sure if you can see the screen when I'm posting things.
I can't,
because you've got it pulled up, but I'm just flipping back and forth. And I wanted to share a comment from Igor, who's in our office. who's just starting his articles. And he said, I have to admit, I wish I listened to this webinar about 4 years ago when I was writing my CELPIP test. It's so helpful and full of insights. And and just a few others. Comeno says, thank you so much for this initiative. It says, could we please have a session for reading and listening, and what other resources can help to achieve a good band score? So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but yeah. And then Addie says, don't want to use a thesaurus on every word. Haha. Like you're not going to have time to do that, but and I'm pretty sure they don't let you bring in a thesaurus into the test as well. So
no, it's all up here, all of your words.
Indeed. So that's great.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that feedback. All right, as I continue to read along, it's maybe not the worst phrasing, but down here when we said, we did not enjoy the food or service. Again, the idea is crystal clear and the grammar is fine. But that's just a pretty simple way to express the idea. And I'm wondering if we could get away from the verb enjoy or the word enjoy and come up with a slightly different approach. Are there any ideas there that you might suggest? We did not enjoy, and we don't want to be rude or too critical either. So that's the trick. You have to think of our tone.
It's probably not so good to say, but the food really sucked.
You would be thinking that, but you wouldn't be typing that. There's a difference, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see if someone else has another way of rephrasing, but we did not enjoy the food.
How about can you come up with an emotion? Like, how did you feel other than you didn't enjoy? Like, we were.
Okay. Addie says, but the experience was not pleasant.
Perfect.
Rohit says we were upset with the food or service.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. I think we still need to capture food and service though as the categories rather than just say it wasn't a pleasant experience. I love the first part, but when you just say experience, it's not quite specific to the question. So we still want to keep in it with the food and service. That was the problem. But yeah, if we just sort of change up this isn't a huge change. But
I actually was going to say that, but I was holding off on the disappointment. I was waiting to see if we had somebody else that.
I think you do.
Yeah, we
were disappointed in the food and the service. I guess upset could work. It's just a stylistic choice. I don't like to make it sound like
and Alex said we found the food distasteful.
Oh, fantastic! Love it.
There's a different word. Unappetizing is another comment. And fantastic. So very good. Thank you guys.
It was unappetizing and the service was substandard. I think you said that earlier, Mark, so I stole that one from you. Yeah, nice. But those are all great suggestions. Yeah, the worst offender in this list is if you look at the next part. This, as an English teacher, this is a pet peeve of mine. Since the manager wasn't there, well, that tells us nothing. Where is there? We need a specific location. So clearly, since the manager was not on the floor, was not in the restaurant, was not maybe on site, any one of those concrete locations is going to be 100% better than just saying no one was there. So again, this is the level of specific detail you're wanting. We paid our bill and left unhappy, blah, blah, blah. I think the rest of it looks fairly standard to me. Anyway, you're just picking and choosing, as I say, little tweaks. This is called tweaking or revising the writing as you go, just to make it a little bit more polished. So that's an example of the vocab. So we've definitely worked through our introduction, right? We've summarized the situation and got our purpose statement. We're going to tackle next these little middle paragraphs known as the body of the writing. And the middle paragraphs always have the very specific details. So let's just discuss the food first, only because it's listed first in the question. That's the only reason we'll do it first. Doesn't really matter which way you do it. But when you discuss the food problems, here's where, again, we want to be specific to really hit that level 9 or even higher. So we know we're at Valentino's, which is an Italian restaurant. That's been established already. So what I need now from our audience is specific food items that you ordered in the restaurant. We don't have to go overboard. We don't have time or word count to do like 10 examples. But if we just even name 2 particular dishes we had, and then stated the problems with each dish in a nutshell, maybe a couple of sentences, that would be more than enough to fulfill this requirement. So can I toss that open to our viewers and to Mark as well? Think Italian.
Maybe, you bet. I'll step in and offer a thought. So, okay, I'm at the keg in my example.
Sure.
My filet mignon was overcooked.
Fantastic. Yep. Overcooked is a huge problem with any dish, so you could throw that in. Yep. The filet mignon was overcooked. It was so dry, I had trouble even biting into it and swallowing
it. Mm-hmm.
Something like that would work well. Good. So filet mignon could be served realistically at an Italian restaurant for sure.
Yeah.
What else could you do? My favorite dish is usually a pasta dish. Now, I don't want you to just say pasta. That, again, is too general. That's just like a category of dishes. So we want to be precise. So we might just say, I always get the chicken fettuccine Alfredo. It's my favorite.
Yes.
Yeah. So my son ordered the chicken fettuccine Alfredo, but unfortunately, the noodles were so overcooked, they were mushy and unappetizing. Something like that would work. What about our viewers' comments? Do we have any Italian dishes? You have to think.
Alex says macaroni and cheese.
Okay, that's precise to a point. What was wrong with the macaroni and cheese, Alex?
Yeah, and that's the key. And we've got some other ones. Krishna says, my tomato soup was too salty.
Oh, excellent. Okay, yeah. Oh, too much salt. What if your filet mignon that you ordered was so rare that the blood was oozing onto the plate? You can be...
wow, that's a good way of describing it. Mm-hmm. We'll avoid the comment, my filet mignon was so rare, it was still mooing.
Yeah, exactly.
So Alex said the macaroni and cheese was too spicy.
Oh, excellent. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be an issue. Good. So again, you're either making these up or you're basing it on your real life experience. True story, I once ordered some garlic toast at an Italian restaurant with my sister. And when the garlic toast arrived at our table, there was green mold growing on the underside of the bread. Like that was absolutely disgusting, as you might imagine.
Well, that's even more appetizing. Think of all of the, what is it? People pay lots of money for the microbial stuff in the yogurt.
Yeah. Pizza coffee?
I'm joking. Addie says soggy. Can we use this word?
Yes, absolutely soggy. Yeah. And if you look at my example, I think I used a similar word, which is mushy. It's almost, I guess it's almost the same. Yeah. So again, all of these ideas are great. I'm just trying to get us to think of naming a precise dish and then just coming out with a problem. So this example paragraph already has very strong vocabulary words. So we don't have to worry about that. But I'm going to read it through to you. And I want you to think now about the sentence structure. A lot of these sentences, you'll notice, tend to be short and simple and about the same length. And in order to improve our score for CELPIP, we want to show the raters that we've got lots of tricks up our sleeve. We've got lots of ways to create sentences of different lengths and different complexity. So right now, this paragraph says, the food that we ordered was overcooked and flavorless. My son's spaghetti noodles were soft and mushy. My veal parmesan was dry and inedible, which means you can't eat it. My fettuccine Alfredo lacked sauce. It was terribly bland. And the word bland means, again, flavorless. So the vocab, I think, is pretty good. But, again, looking back at our raters checklist, we're now moving down to this third component. The raters do want to see that you're able to take your sentences and connect them into longer, more complex structures. So think about conjunctions. These are on a basic level. Those words are and, so, but. You don't want to just use simple words, though. Think bigger. Think of words like because, even though, although, additionally, another reason is, and so on. There are just so many ways to connect ideas together in the English language. However, we don't always do it that way. All right. So again, here's our paragraph we started with. There are so many ways you could revise this, but I'd just like to read it out. And as we go, I'm going to throw in some transitions. And you'll see what I mean by just changing things up a little bit and making the sentences more complex. So this says, the food that we ordered was overcooked and flavorless. For example, my son's spaghetti noodles were soft and mushy, and my veal parmigiana was dry and inedible. I don't love using the word and, but sometimes it works in a situation like so. This is technically a compound sentence. Those last two sentences, though, great vocabulary and attention to detail, but they're both simple. And I want to change that. So I'm going to start the sentence with an adverb. I'm trying to give that emotion and express how I was feeling when I was eating this meal. So disappointingly, it's a nice big word too, my fettuccine Alfredo lacked sauce, making it terribly bland. So that's all it took. Rather than have these two short, simple sentences, I'm going to change the structure just ever so slightly there. And by doing that, I'm making now a complex sentence. So those four little highlighted words in yellow are demonstrating different ways to start connecting ideas or smoothing them together, which really counts for the coherence or the way all ideas flow together. Just part of your score. And again, there's a million ways you could play with your sentence structure, but this is just one example to get you thinking about it. As the raters do like to see a good variety of ways you can create these ideas and connect them together. Okay, so we can check off the food paragraph. I think we've handled that one nicely. We have one more main content area to address, which is the service. So once again, I'd like to open this up for feedback from the viewers to think about all the terrible restaurant meals they've ever had. And can you identify some problems with the service?
Oh, well,
What went wrong?
one that comes right off the top of my head is it took forever for the food to arrive.
Yeah, that's a common one. Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah. So
Krishna,
when you say it,
sorry,
go ahead.
Say, Krishna just jumped in quick with just a follow-up question to the previous slide. He said, instead of, for example, can we mention, for instance?
Yeah, means the same thing. Perfect. And to further to that, if you're using that kind of connection, like in one part of your email, you might say, for example, later on, you might switch it to for instance. Means the same thing, but at least you're using different transitions. So you're just not repeating over and over. So these are the types of synonyms that I want you to come up with in your own writing for sure. Yeah, great question.
Okay. So I'm still waiting to see if we got any more. So maybe we'll continue forward with problems with the service. So what was wrong with the service that you received at this Valentino's, you guys? Let us know.
Yeah, like the long wait time is usually one of the first things we think of. And if that's your idea, and I think that's one of the ideas I put into my example here, rather than just say we waited a long time, again, be particular. How long did you really wait? And in my example, you can see we sat at our table for 20 minutes before the server presented us with menus. And the appetizers we ordered arrived at the same time as the entrees. So this is based on a restaurant meal I actually had. So these ideas were true to me. Yeah. The last one I made up, this might have happened to you. I was shocked to discover that my wine glass was rimmed with pink lipstick. So dirty dishes is part of the service, right?
Oh,
that ever happened to you? Yeah. Pretty gross.
Well, we've definitely gotten, food that's been baked on utensils, right? Where they haven't quite cleaned them properly. Kushbu, she says, basically we had to wait even after having booked or made a reservation. And so sometimes we think this is something creative. It's all started off wrong because, they didn't even have a table ready for us at our time when we had booked. So let's see what else we have here.
Or maybe they lost your reservation. You showed up and they'd already given another person or another group your table.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. We've got, Krishna says the food was served at incorrect temperatures. Order, like you said, the orders were mixed up. Imagine Magician here says the waiter mistook our orders with other guests. Oh, Addie. Oh, here's a good one. Dirty nails. True story. So
what?
So the server was handing out the plates, and I guess I'm assuming their fingernails were pretty nasty.
Yeah, which makes you wonder what's been touching your food exactly.
Exactly. And Shirley says our table was dirty when we arrived. So they didn't even bother to clean off the table. And for a fancy, prestigious restaurant like Valentino's, boy, these are all definitely
not
taboo.
Acceptable. Exactly. Not acceptable. Right. So again, you've all come up with so many great ideas. I would say, 2 or 3 specifics is probably enough. You only have 200 words to write about. So you can't be throwing in, 8 examples, but I think a paragraph of about this length is decent. So we've got our specific details that are on topic. These are all examples of bad service, which is the only thing we're writing about in this paragraph. As I say, vocab's pretty precise, descriptive. We're naming things like appetizers, entrees. It's not just lipstick, it's pink lipstick, and so on. And I think our sentence structure here actually does demonstrate some longer and more complex ideas. Do you notice the exclamation mark at the end of the word lipstick? So we threw that in for emphasis, and it's a slightly different punctuation mark too. So we're showing the raters we know how to use that correctly. All of these skills will add up and hopefully help us jump up into that level 9 or higher even. So looking at the rest of this checklist, we're almost done here. So right at the bottom, the last component that the raters look at is your task fulfillment. So they do want to make sure that every single detail included here is on topic. You're only allowed to complain about food, complain about service, ask for a solution that makes sense. Anything else in this email is considered off topic, and we would lose marks if we went off in another direction. So that's what relevance means. It's on topic. We have to give a complete answer, which we've done. We've checked off all of those bulleted points from the test instruction, and we've had a good discussion about tone already. But I think what I'd like us to do to finish this email as we write the conclusion, I do want to address tone one last time, as tone is difficult to learn and practice, I think, for some of us. So I just took the liberty to save a wee bit of time here. I went ahead and drafted out a concluding paragraph. And what I wanted to accomplish here is just, again, to summarize the main points. I want to remind the manager reading that the food and service wasn't great. We had asked for a refund in the beginning. So I returned to that and actually quoted the amount of money from our bill and left contact details. I think all of these details are pretty relevant for the conclusion. So I'll read it out. As I'm reading, can you look for words or phrases that are a little bit maybe harsh though? Is there anything a bit too critical or bossy here that we need to tone down? That's what I'd like to look at here. So it says, having eaten at Valentino's many times before, we were upset by the poor quality of food and service that we received last evening. We want you to refund our bill, totaling this amount, as a means of remedying the situation, which just means fixing the problem. I can be reached at this phone number if you require more information. So again, sentence structure is great, vocab's wonderful, but there are a few areas where I feel anyway, it's just a little bit too harsh. And I'm wondering how you all feel about this. We've already said, well, we've eaten here many times, but we were upset by the poor quality of food and service. Might be okay. But I'm wondering is if we say we're so upset, the manager might think, well, they're not coming back, so why should I give them their money back?
That's a great point that people don't understand. That's a great point. If you are, if you're too overbearing in your approach, people, they will realize, well, you're a lost cause. So, and the whole purpose is to help them realize that you're not throwing, the restaurant out the door. You're considering going back if they just remedy this. So I think if I was to put something in there for upset, I would probably put, we were extremely disappointed.
Yes.
Like you've been so good in the past, and it's so sad to see you fall short this time when you were, it was such a great place before.
I agree. We were disappointed. I went with surprised, which is similar approach, I suppose. We were surprised at the poor quality, but I think this still leaves the door open for a return visit. We've established we've been here before. So that's why we're so surprised now at the poor quality of food and service that we received last evening. So those were the main ideas we wrote about. So we're just summarizing those main content areas. This next part has to go. This is not acceptable writing. We want you to refund our bill. Too bossy, too critical, too demanding. The manager will read this and roll their eyes and say, oh, this person's difficult. I don't want to help them,
I have to read Imagine Magician's response here. He said, we want you to kind of bossy. Maybe we would appreciate a refund. Absolutely. So they actually jumped the gun there. They were right on the same wavelength here.
Fantastic. We would appreciate a refund. Sounds great. Anything else before I share mine? Mine's a little bit more assertive, but I'm aiming for a respectful approach. So before I share an example with you, I wonder if we've got any other ideas from the rest of you.
So Shirley says, we want you to refund our bill, seems demanding. And then Kushbu says, we would request you to issue a refund.
Yes. Can I just jump in right there? When you say we would like, that is actually the easiest way to soften the tone. We never say we want. As soon as you say we would like, you're already softening and using a more gentle approach. So even if that's all you do, we would like you to refund our bill, it still sounds so much more polite than saying we want you to. So that's just a really nice suggestion all on its own there, I think. Yeah, great. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to jump on that.
That was good. That's perfect. Yes.
All right. So Mine is a bit more assertive, but I tried to be a little fancy with the language just to demonstrate. So we respectfully request that you refund our bill. I felt like that might catch the attention of the manager. I'm still making my request, not a demand, but I'm trying to be respectful. But again, I want to be assertive to make them realize that it was an issue for me, that we didn't enjoy ourselves. So just another idea that you could use if you so chose. Giving the total dollar amount helpful here too. It's another detail that we can add. One more thing you might change. You might not have noticed this, but what do you think of this here? When we say, I can be reached at this number if you require more information. What I'm going to suggest we do is take the focus off of us when we say, I can be reached. Since we're writing to this restaurant manager, we're going to make it all about them and their needs. We're going to say, please phone me if you require more information. Do you see the difference? It's so slight. Instead of, I can be reached here, oh, please phone me if you require more info. So try your very best when you're writing almost in a business context, we're writing to a manager, try to focus more on the reader's needs and attention versus your own needs, even though you're the one that's asking for the refund. When you do that, you actually use a very much more gentler tone. It's a much more polite way to address this part of the email. And hopefully, because it's our very last sentence they read, they're going to remember that polite tone even more and be more apt to agree with us, right? At the end.
Yeah.
Anyway,
please is a nice word. Please is a nice word.
Never go wrong with please. The last thing you must address here as part of the email is just come up with your own sign off. So in Canadian culture, I think if you memorized the words regards or sincerely or even best, I think those three are fairly widely used in Canada anyway, and they're common. So you don't need to get over the top fancy with whatever sign off you're choosing. So whatever it is, you put a capital on the first word. This is only one word, so best. You notice there's a comma. You're leaving a blank space, and then you're writing your name. In a formal email like this, as we're writing to a manager, you should be including your first and last name. If you were writing just to a friend or someone you knew well, like a colleague, then you could just leave your first name. That's okay. But this person doesn't know you. It's formal. So let's leave our first and last name there instead. So that's how you structure. Are there any questions about sign-offs before we leave this? I always get a ton of questions about sign-offs.
Yeah. Krishna says, yours sincerely, as a possibility. Any other sign-off questions, you guys?
Yeah, we often get quite a few. Yeah. You don't want to go, again, too far over the top. And by that,
You're extremely disappointed and unhappy customer.
Exactly. That would be an example of taking it far too far. So keep it simple but polite and customary. This is more about just being customary in the structure of an email more than anything. So as long as you have it.
Comeno says, how about kind regards?
Yeah. Regards is sort of the base sign off. And some of us like to change it up a bit. Kind regards, best regards. I think those are the two anyway. Yeah. Kind regards, best regards, or just regards is fine.
Gotcha.
All of those are acceptable.
Addie asks the question, can we add the phone number below our name in the sign-off?
Yeah, you could, for sure. Yeah. It's customary to include contact info in the last paragraph, but you could also include it below your name as well. I've seen it there too. What you're trying to do basically is make it as easy as possible for the reader to get a hold of you. So that's why I think by including that number as well in that last paragraph, it's in the last sentence. So they're going to see it right away. If you wanted to add it below your name, sure. As long as they can find you and phone you to make amends here, I think that's really the purpose you're aiming for.
And the last question, Krishna says, yours faithfully. Will that work?
That's a little what I call over the top. I don't know, to be honest, if this is more of a cultural difference. In some parts of the world, maybe that's acceptable. And I only say that because a lot of test takers I work with are from all over the world. That seems to be a very common one in other parts. It's not common or even appropriate in Canada. So as soon as you say anything about being faithful, I think there's a connection to religion right away. And that's just almost a taboo topic. In Canada, we don't talk about religion, marital status, or money with people we don't know. We just don't do that. It makes people uncomfortable. So please take out any reference to be faithful, faithfully yours. It would make your reader probably feel a bit uncomfortable. It's just sort of a shocking tone. It's not common, and it's not really appropriate for this situation. So yeah, that's what I mean. Keep it simple. Best regards, sincerely. You'll never go wrong with any of those sign-offs. So to be on the safe side, I think those are good ones to use. Nice. I'm glad you asked that one, but faithfully. Okay. We've completed the entire Raiders checklist. The last thing I wanted to double check is just the format of the email from start to finish. So I'll put that on the next screen. We still need to see the word count. We're trying to get close to 200 words. So from beginning to end, word for word, this is exactly what the email would look like on your computer screen when you submit it. And I'm going to quickly just point out the features. So all of the sentences, as you can see, even the greeting and the sign off down here, they're all flush against the left margin. So you're not, spacing the beginning of a paragraph away out here. Everything lines up down the left-hand side here of the computer screen. Your greeting goes at the top. By the way, we use a ... It's a colon when it's a more formal piece. You could put a comma. It just doesn't quite have the same formality. Both would be acceptable for this email. But if you're wondering why there's a ... or called a colon, that's why. It's a slightly more formal tone. We've left a blank space here. There's our first paragraph. It's the intro, gives us the background about what's happening. We had a terrible meal. It gives us also our request about the refund. We've left a blank space. We've written all about the terrible food and given some examples. Blank space. Next paragraph's all about the bad service. Blank space again, and the conclusion. One more blank space. Sign off, blank space, name. So this is the exact structure that you're going to aim for when you're writing your own email for sure. And the word count's correct. So it's almost 200 words, which is what we were aiming for. As you were typing on the computer screen, this would have been visible to you. We just didn't bother with it as we were discussing paragraph by paragraph. Gotcha. But good news is we're close to 200. So I think and you see what I mean? By getting closer to 200, look at all of just the extra little fun details we've included. Like yesterday evening, my teenage son and I dined at Valentino's. Takes a few more words to say that rather than just say, we ate at your restaurant. So by aiming
question, sorry to cut you off, Brandi. One question I have, do you ever use like the first names of people? So would you say yesterday evening, my teenage son, Ryan, and I dined at Valentino's? Like, is that, like, obviously we're putting our name on here as well.
Yeah.
But is there, like, does it make a difference, being that specific?
So. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be wrong to do so. I think it's more just a judgment call. And I always think in my own mind when I'm writing anything, what does the reader need to know from me in order to make sense of the situation? Gotcha. So does it matter to them that my son's name is Ryan? Yeah. In this case, no, it's not going to make any difference. So I think as long as we just indicate it was, me and my teenage son, and we included teenage son because it's the high school graduation. So that made sense. Course. Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. So I don't think the name there really makes a lot of sense. If you included it, it's not going to be wrong. I mean, you wouldn't lose marks because you put the name. It just wouldn't be something most of us would think of maybe. The name at the bottom, I forgot to mention, you're very welcome to make up any name at all. Like Margaret Smith. I don't know anyone named Margaret Smith. I just threw that in as the first name off the top of my head. So as long as you have a name for CELPIP, that's all that matters. Some people use their own name and that's okay too. But for privacy reasons, a lot of us are just more comfortable using what we call an alias. Like you're making up whatever name you would like. So that's perfectly fine. Just have a name, whatever the name is. And that's all that matters. Really quickly before we log off, there's a lot of free materials that we have to help people continue on with their CELPIP studies. And we've linked them at the bottom of the YouTube page here, I believe, so you can access them quickly. I'm going to share with you a couple of money-saving tips, though, as any language proficiency test you take is expensive. CELPIP as well costs 280 Canadian dollars to take. It's a high-stakes test, and we want to make sure you do well on it the first time through. If you are a newcomer to Canada, and that means you've been in Canada for 5 years or less, our company Prometric does have a partnership with the National Bank of Canada. So if you open a bank account with them, the bank itself is going to give you a $280 cashback feature. So that's going to pay for the cost of the CELPIP test, just less the taxes. So we do have more information on our website, but I wanted to mention that. And we also actually have a little CELPIP research study that's ongoing. Oops, it's been extended till November. I apologize, I forgot to change my dates here. But if you've already taken an IELTS general test this year from February 1st, or if you're going to take IELTS before November 1st of this year, then you would be eligible to participate in a CELPIP research study. So you could apply to be included, and if you're accepted, they'll give you an absolutely free CELPIP test. And you can use the scores that you earn on your listening, reading, writing, and speaking to apply for your immigration status as well. So I thought I'd mention those as money-saving tips to you. We do have a ton of free webinars as well that you can sign up for on our website. The link is at the bottom. So celpip.ca/webinars. We do pretty much each of these webinars that walk you through the whole test. So we do an introduction called General Overview, and then there are practice test questions for each of listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So you can attend any of these sessions with people from all over the world on our platform, or perhaps Mark and I can collaborate in the future and bring you another session as well. That would be
absolutely
lots of fun. And remember, I mentioned you had a question earlier about what's the difference between levels 11 and 12. And this is exactly the resource I would point you towards. So again, on our website at celpip.ca, right at the top where the preparation materials are housed, there's something called the CELPIP score comparison chart. So you get to click on any level you're interested in viewing. So this one happens to be level 12. You'll get to either read through a real test taker's written response for both tasks 1 and 2, or you can look at the speaking. You'll be able to listen to the recordings of the responses people gave on their real tests from the past. So you'll know what score they got, but more importantly, you'll see the rater's notes. So all of the strengths and the weaknesses in these test taker responses are included there for you to review. So it just allows you to see or understand, I guess, a bit more about how the scores are given. So what does a level 9 writing response look like? How does that compare against a level 12? If you wanted to look at levels 11 and 12, I guess that would be a good way to do it too. And there are 2 free practice tests right on our website. So I would encourage you to go there. We do have a blog. We do have a YouTube channel ourselves as well with lots and lots of episodes from all components of language. We also, in our bookstore, have practice tests for sale and some self-guided programs like the Accelerate or the Practice and Analysis as well. And we have study guides, we have textbooks, we've got common CELPIP error books. Now today's Tuesday, starting tomorrow, I believe it is, we actually have a 50% off sale in our bookstore. So you can see the link at the bottom. So that might be something that would interest viewers who are looking to take CELPIP in the near future. Our practice tests are by far the most popular items, but if you're looking to purchase one additional material, I probably recommend the Accelerate program, as you can study through on your own pace. It gives you lots of helpful tips. We do have a customer service email too if you need questions answered specifically about CELPIP, and we do also have material uploaded to all of the social media channels. So we still present live on YouTube, usually on the 3rd Tuesday of each month, and then on Instagram as well. We go live once a month. Usually it's a 3rd Monday as well. So you could subscribe to our channels there if you wanted more information and live Q&A with your presenter, which is often me, I will admit. It's my favorite part of the job, to be honest, is just interacting with each of you. So I'm going to exit my slideshow here and then come back to all of you. So again, I haven't been able to see the screen while I've been presenting. So let's go back here, and there I am, and there is Mark as well. I'm back.
Yes, and I've got a question queued up here. So we've got a few last-minute questions as we wrap up. So Patrick says, do we need to worry about spelling?
Yes, spelling and grammar do count. Now, in this episode, I purposely didn't put a lot of those mistakes in, as we had more than enough to talk about. But as we went through and improved our vocabulary and sentence structure, you're also going to look for grammar and writing mistakes. Anything at all that you can find and fix, that's what you're going to do. Spelling is a minor mistake. If you make the odd spelling mistake, it's probably not going to affect our ability to understand the writing. But that being said, if you're making spelling mistakes all the way through in every sentence, it's going to add up and it will negatively impact your score. So try your best. That's all we can say. It's a Canadian test, so I always say try to learn the Canadian spellings if you can. But as we are all creatures of habit, if you are used to, the British spelling patterns, American spelling patterns, as long as you're consistent and you use that same pattern all the way through the writing, it's fine. You're not going to lose marks. But try your best to learn the Canadian spellings. There's a little bit different than the American ones for sure.
Perfect. Krishna asks kind of a general question here. Can you mention any mistakes to avoid while writing the email? And I know throughout the whole presentation today, we've talked about a lot of those things and transitions, but are there any,
like common mistakes?
mistakes that people make?
I would say one of the biggest challenges right off the top when you look at the finished piece of writing is when people have submitted it as one gigantic paragraph. So again, imagine the computer screen with this. I think of it as a brick of information like this. And when we don't separate out the main ideas into those different paragraphs, it just makes it so difficult for the reader to understand, oh, you were just talking about poor food and now we're talking about service. And, don't make it harder for the readers to follow your train of thought. So definitely learning how to paragraph any piece of writing is going to help you not just on CELPIP, but in your day-to-day writing as well. I'd say another weakness that a lot of the test takers I work with are still brushing up on is what we focused on in today's episode too, about those specific details. A lot of us have a tendency to just scratch the surface. Oh, wait, we had a terrible meal. We didn't enjoy the service. We'd really like you to do something for us. If we're writing like that, you're likely not going to achieve that level 9 or higher, at least under the content details. So again, think of the word complexity and precision, like specific details. Those are your best friends for the CELPIP writing test. And again, in your day-to-day life, the more interesting you make your writing, the more detail you give, again, the reader understands much more fully and completely what it is you're trying to communicate. That's the whole point of writing in the first place. You don't want the reader to come back at you with questions. So if you've done your job well with the writing, they'll understand the entire situation, be crystal clear, and know how to proceed from there. So that's the ultimate goal. And it takes practice.
And that's an actual brilliant tip, because that's exactly what we do in our law firm when we're representing our clients. We consider it a failure if immigration has to come back and ask more questions because we were not clear or comprehensive enough in our answer.
Yeah.
All right. Yoon Ji says, what happens if you write more than 200 words?
Again, you have that 10% leeway. So technically you could write 220 words and you wouldn't lose marks. If you go above that though, you'll lose I hate to say lose marks. That's not quite accurate. So that big checklist we looked at with those 4 categories, so content, vocab, all the paragraph and grammar skills, and then the task fulfillment. What the raters do is they look at your strengths and weaknesses across all 4 of those categories, and they weigh them or balance them, and they're going to give you a level score based on the big picture. So if you have given tons of specific details, paragraphed appropriately, you don't have very many grammar mistakes at all, and you've answered the question, but you write 225 words, it's probably not going to affect your score at all if that's the only tiny little mistake you've made. So again, writing slightly more than 200 words, it's such a minor mistake to make in the big picture of things. So when you're trying to understand the scoring, try not to get bogged down in those little tiny details. Like again, with the spelling's important, yes, but if you just make 3 spelling mistakes, but everything else is so accurate, it's probably not even going to affect the score, right? There are some mistakes that are more major than others, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But try your best. I should still qualify. Try your best to follow the instructions. Like if it says 200 words, please honor that. But it's not the end of the world if you go a little bit above, is what I'm also trying to say.
Gotcha. Okay, Krishna says, in general, for all of the topics, are there some that are formal and some that are meant to be written informally, or is it by and large more formal? If you take that approach, you're gonna be better off.
I think for the CELPIP test, again, we've got those 2 free practice tests on our website. So if you go on there at your own leisure and look at the practice writing questions, you'll probably notice that most of the questions there are almost always asking you to write to a stranger. Oftentimes it is a manager or someone like your boss or somebody like that. I can't say with 100% certainty on CELPIP it's always going to be formal. What I can say is that historically in the past, when you look at all of the past episodes we've done together in practice like this, the vast majority of the questions tend to require that formal tone. So probably, Krishna, it'll be formal like what we did today. But as always, you're always meant to consider who is reading, what do they need to know, and then how will I adjust my tone accordingly to make sense? That's always the question you're asking yourself as a writer. Yeah, if it's a friend, you can be casual. Why not throw in some idioms there? It would make sense, but probably more formal on CELPIP, I would suggest, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, here's the best question of all, Brandi, and I'm going to leave it up to you to answer this one.
Now I'm worried.
Please, what test will you suggest, CELPIP or IELTS?
I get this question all the time. And since I work for CELPIP, can you guess what my answer is going to be? But in all honesty, I sincerely say there are choices. Everybody taking a language proficiency test has choices. There are multiple tests out there with different companies. CELPIP is one of them, IELTS is another, Pearson, and so on. So I think what I would recommend each of you do is attend some webinars. We do lots of free webinars, and I'm guessing IELTS probably does as well, and so on. So I would recommend you take a few webinars from each company, try a practice test from each test as well. Do a CELPIP practice, do an IELTS practice. Each individual needs to decide for themselves which style of test is better suited for their own learning needs. We're all different. Some of us might say, oh, well, the structure and content of the CELPIP is just easier for me to understand. I'll take the CELPIP. But some people might feel that way about IELTS. So it's really up to the individual test taker to decide how they're going to earn the score they need. At the end of the day, this is your immigration journey. So you need to be comfortable with whatever test you choose. So my job as a CELPIP language instructor is to try my very best to give you tips to help you on your journey and prepare for CELPIP if that's the path that you choose. But again, it's completely up to you to decide which one's going to work best. Diplomatic, like a Canadian.
No, that's a good response. And one thing also to consider, in the past, people who were outside of Canada really only had one option, but that's changing. And so go to the CELPIP website and take a look at all the locations where now the CELPIP is offered outside of Canada. And then remember as well that CELPIP is a Canadian, it's a Canadian test. It's not an English or Australian or whatever focus. So we know what a flat is here in Canada. It's a tire that has no air in it. It's not an apartment, right? Exactly. And so things like that can throw people off if you've learned your English, or this is where it's developed, was in Canada and North America. Some of the terminology and the vocabulary may be more familiar than if you were to write some of the other tests. So just keep that in mind as well. So I'll just bring that up. Okay, we'll do a couple more here. Krishna says, this is so helpful. Thank you, Mark, Brandi, and the CELPIP team. And then we've got your team also posting comments. So I'm not pulling all of them up there, but there's lots of links and things that are being shared. And Alex says, share the link to opening the bank account. And that's all been shared in there. So I'll encourage you to go check that out. And Kushbu says, how to improve vocabulary? Like, are there some tips or strategies that you have for increasing vocabulary?
Okay, yeah. So there is actually a vocabulary book that our company sells through the Chapter bookstore, Chapters and Indigo in Canada. So on our bookstore website, there's a link to take you right to the bookstore, and you can browse that to see if it's suitable for you to purchase. So that would be a quick way just to expose yourself to different, more specific, precise words. But I think an even better way, frankly, is you simply must read every single day. I'm not asking you to cram before your test and read for 5 hours one day and expect to just magically learn these words. It's a process. So I would recommend that you set aside even 20 or 30 minutes every single day, at least every second day if you can. At the same time, every day as well is a good tip that I would share. If you're a morning person, have your morning coffee and find something you enjoy reading about. It really doesn't matter what it is. It could just be an online newspaper or news channel that you enjoy. If you're like me, I love to read fiction novels. I do that just before bed, 20 minutes a night. That's what I do. So whatever you're deciding interests you, you're going to read through that. And your job is to make sure you're understanding about 80% of what's there. You've chosen a material to read at the right level for you if you're developing your vocab. If you can understand about 80% of the content already there. The 20% you don't understand, this is how you now increase your vocab, because you're going to identify that new word to you. You're going to try to guess what that word means through the other sentences around that word, right? So if you understand mostly everything else in that paragraph, then you can take a guess as to what this new word means. That's what I recommend you do first. Use the brain power, try to figure it out, then double check to see if you're right with your guess. Use an online dictionary. So type the word into your whatever resource you're using. Read the dictionary, but as importantly, look at the sample sentences that the dictionary will give you so you understand how this word is used in that sentence as well. I always recommend to my students, and this is where we sometimes go a bit wrong, you can't learn it all. You can't, if you have 20 new words in that one session, you're not going to remember all 20 words. That's far too much for one session. So I would recommend you take, depends on you really, anywhere from 2 to 5 words in one session. Let's just say, keep a journal, write those words down. Make sure you know what they mean, but more importantly, write down that sample sentence that shows you how that word is used properly. And then the next day when you go to start reading, review the list of your new vocab first. Read through them, close the book, and in your mind, try to make up your own sentences with those same new words, right? And double check you're right. So if you've mastered yesterday's words, then you're ready to now go on with new words. Please don't add new words to your list until you've mastered the old ones. Because what ends up happening, you get this big list of 50 words and you only really remember about 7 of them. So there's no sense overwhelming the brain. The brain does have some of us have better memories than others, but you're not going to retain it all if you do too much too fast. And you're also not going to enjoy it if you tax yourself too much. When you're not enjoying it, you tend not to do it. And then you don't get any better at the skill. So that's my long-winded response. I'm passionate about reading.
It's great. And Brandi, we're absolutely going to have you come back and join us again. There's a bunch of questions that I know we're not going to be able to get at to. I've got a consult here in 3 minutes, but I can just maybe knock off just a couple. Addie asks about a spell checker. And then someone had said, Shirley said that there actually is a spell checker while you write. So within the CELPIP itself. So that's a huge, huge plus.
Yeah. The spell checker, though, is not going to automatically correct your spelling. What it will do is underline a word in red that the computer doesn't recognize. It'll then, just like in Microsoft Word, when you right-click with your mouse on that underlined word, the computer for CELPIP will open up a small box of 3 or 4 suggested words that it thinks you might have meant. It's still up to you to read those words and decide if that's really the right way to spell it, and click on it, and the computer will adjust it for you. So you still have a little bit of decision making, but it's a help anyway. Yeah,
that's great. So Addie's got his test scheduled. Anafi says the CELPIP format is more easy, but you always need to practice more. And I think that's for everything. And and then Comeno says, so insightful. This webinar is an eye opener. I'm glad I didn't miss it. Thank you, CELPIP team and Mark. And Kushbu says, thanks a lot, Brandi. And then I'll finish off with one last miscellaneous comment. When they do super chats, I need to pull them up. Messi says, Mark, I got my e-Coper today. Your masterclass course helped me big time. I think is what he's saying. That was all that I relied on. Thank you. You're very, very welcome, Messi. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Brandi. It was great having you join us. And this is a lot of fun. We definitely need to have you come back and be a part of this for us. So thank you.
Okay,
and we'll make sure there's all those links below. We'll make sure that we've added all those in, and we'll wrap this up.
Good.
All right. Thanks so much, Brandi.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.